Sports Desk at the Columbus Dispatch presents the BuckeyeXtra Basketball Podcast. With your host, Ohio State basketball beat writer Adam Jardy.
Brady Batiste says, "Give me the rock." Here it goes. Up and away. Slam jam bam. And now he does a little dance.
Now, the BuckeyeXtra Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Adam Jardy from the Columbus Dispatch. Today is Wednesday, December 3rd, 2025. It's my official duty to welcome you into episode 512 of the BuckeyeXtra Men's Basketball Podcast. Welcome to Jubilation City. Welcome to the longest break we've had to this point of the season. Ohio State most recently played on Friday, as you're, I'm sure, aware, 67-66, last-second buzzer-beating loss at Pitt. And then the Buckeyes able to enjoy an 8-day break before returning to action this Saturday at Northwestern. I will be there. I'll have full coverage for you on the ground from Evanston. But as I mentioned in the last podcast, I felt like there would be a chance maybe midweek to just kind of assess things a little bit and get a little bit more just kind of into where the team stands now as Big Ten play gets underway. And this seems like the perfect opportunity to do that. Like I said, it's Wednesday morning. We got our first snow of the year in Columbus, first significant snow. My kids had Tuesday off from school. My wife's a teacher. She was off. So we had a great day playing in the snow, and it was our first time for our puppies seeing the snow. And it feels like we're settling into winter. We're settling into the season. It's a fun time of year, and it's going to be a big upcoming week for Ohio State. When you sit down and you look at the schedule and you look at, what just happened last time out on the court, but to lay it out or to map it out for you in case you're unaware, Ohio State at Northwestern Saturday, 2 p.m. tip, Big Ten Network. Then the Buckeyes return home and host Illinois on December 9th. That's a 7:30 tip. That's on Peacock. And then then the Buckeyes go to Cleveland to play West Virginia on December 13th. Then we'll have another week off before playing North Carolina and Atlanta. So we are in this stretch right now where the Buckeyes are playing high-level competition every night for the next 2 weeks. Time is meaningless. And it seems like a good chance to just take a little bit of stock, again, like I said, as to what happened in that Pitt game and what it means for Ohio State's season to this point, and what it also does or does not mean for this Northwestern game here on Saturday. So we're going to dive into all that here in just a second. Before we do, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you enjoy your favorite podcasts. If you subscribe, you'll automatically get the newest ones just as soon as our man Patrick Flaherty, the Podfather, can grab them and publish them for us. While you're subscribing or downloading, please leave a review, please click 5 stars, and please consider telling a friend. Thanks to everyone who's taken the time to do all those things. So I had a story that went up on Monday because we got our first net rankings of the season. And as we learned last year watching Ohio State, the net rankings aren't necessarily the be-all, end-all. Ohio State's net ranking was in line with a team that would have a pretty decent shot of making the NCAA tournament, but obviously, ultimately, the Buckeyes were not picked, and at 17 and 15 did not play in the postseason. The net rankings used by the NCAA to evaluate resumes, to sift through teams, and as a quick refresher, broken down into 4 quadrants. Top games are Quad 1, Quad 2, Quad 3, and then Quad 4. So playing at Duke, that would be a Quad 1 game. Hosting, pretty much everybody that Ohio State's hosted outside of Notre Dame, Quad 4 game. So the point is to build your best resume for inclusion and to have a better seed. You want more Quad 1, Quad 2 opportunities. You don't want anything bad in the bottom 2 quadrants. And when you look at where Ohio State sits right now, that was a Quad 3 loss for Ohio State in the Peterson Event Center on Saturday night. And when you look at all the various rankings, I cite different ones of these at different times throughout the year, but they're all, we'll kind of look at all of them and use them to form a full picture kind of where Ohio State sits right now. So at barttorvik.com, I actually found this one interesting when I looked at the data this morning, because Bart Torvik has an interesting website where there's a lot of KenPom similarities as far as some of the data you can look at. but it enables you to factor out any sort of preseason bias or any sort of preseason expectations and data and things like that, and just evaluate, okay, from this day to this day, how did this team play relative to the rest of the country? So Bart Torvik has been lower on the Buckeyes for much of the season than most of the other numbers. But at this moment, even with the loss to Pitt, Torvik has Ohio State at number 25. When you remove the preseason bias, Ohio State is number 47. When you go over to evanmia.com, Ohio State is number 22 in Evan's rankings. Over at KenPom, our standby, the Buckeyes are number 33. And then when you go to John Rothstein, CBS Sports analyst, he has Ohio State at number 43 in his top 45. Now, how does all that impact the net? Well, some of that stuff kind of gets, I guess I shouldn't say that it gets baked into that. The net's kind of confusing, to be totally honest. But the net, in the net rankings, the first ones that debuted on Monday, as we sit here now on Wednesday, Ohio State is number 60 in the net. The Buckeyes have not yet played a game outside of the bottom two quadrants. The win against Notre Dame was a quad 3 game. The loss to Pitt was a quad 3 loss. And then the wins against IU Indy, Appalachian State, Western Michigan, Purdue Fort Wayne, and Mount St. Mary's, those are all quad 4 games. Those are the kinds of games that do not help your resume one bit. If you lose them, they will destroy your resume. Quad 3, it gets somewhat similar. You don't want to have a quad 3 loss. You don't want to have too many quad 3 losses. One of the best things Ohio State fans can do right now, outside of rooting for their team to win, is you're probably rooting for Pitt to win. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. But I'm pulling up Ohio State's net rankings and quadrant rankings from last season, where, again, Ohio State came, as we know, like one win away from making the NCAA tournament. But when you look at last year's net rankings, so keep scrolling down. So Ohio State finished 39th in the net last year. Ohio State did not have any losses outside of the first two quadrants. The Buckeyes were 6-11 in quad 1, 3-4 in quad 2. That makes up all 15 losses. The only quad 3 game on Ohio State's schedule last year ended up being a home win against Washington. And then Ohio State had 6 quad 4 games, all at home. Those were all the bye games. Youngstown State, Indiana State, Valpo, Campbell, Evansville, and Green Bay. So what that does tell us is that Ohio State is going to have opportunities moving forward, and we'll get into that again here in just a second. But before we talk about what's to come, let's just kind of take a look at how damaging was this Pitt loss for Ohio State. And again, keeping in mind that Ohio State's not yet played in December. There's still a 20-game Big Ten schedule. There's still non-conference games against North Carolina, and Virginia, all to come, in addition to that 20-game league schedule. So there will be opportunities ahead. This is just one game. But when you do look at the numbers, this is the type of loss that has the potential to drag down a resume unless you can really outperform what you've shown maybe to this point. This was the worst KenPom loss of the Diebler era, which is not super long, but Pitt was 101st at KenPom. And weirdly enough, the previous worst loss for Ohio State, according to KenPom, in the Diebler era was against number 63 Pitt last season. So the Panthers are just out here destroying Ohio State resumes on a yearly basis right now. As a result of this loss, Ohio State's now one of the final 4 byes in Joe Lunardi's bracket projection at ESPN. That would have Ohio State as a 10 seed playing in Portland. It's still ridiculous to really be talking about bracketology and about seed projections and things like that when, again, the team has not yet played a conference game and has not done anything in December yet. But it is worth pointing out, like, that's with one loss based on the body of work Ohio State has to this point, that has slid Ohio State far enough to where it is it's a toss-up almost at this point. Would this team make the tournament right now? And I have something else to say on that. I'm sure it will come back to me. But when we think back to last year, and one of the things I talked about so much down the stretch when even as Ohio State was kind of win a game, lose a game, whatever, Ohio State, when the bubble talk starts to pick up, end of January, early February, it's been proven true year after year. It is much harder to play your way on the bubble than to play your way off the bubble. And I think that's something to keep in the back of our minds as Ohio State gets going now, because this Pitt loss is the kind of loss that it will put a team that's the kind of loss that can put you on the wrong side of that conversation. And it would behoove Ohio State, when that bubble talk rolls around, to safely be on the right side of it. Because, again, you don't want to have to bank on climbing your way in, knocking somebody out. It's much harder, as we saw last year, to stay, or it's much harder to play your way in than to play your way out. I mean, it took all the way down to the end of the season for Ohio State to really get to that point. Certainly the loss at Indiana, that didn't help. The home loss to Northwestern was kind of the one that threw it a bit, where Ohio State had been 7-7 and played Michigan to a 3-point loss at home. And then Ohio State lost by 21 at home to Northwestern. And then everyone was sick. They lost to UCLA. At that point, they were definitely trending in the wrong direction. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where you are needing to pull out some significant wins late just to try to give yourself a chance. You want to be on the other side of that. And along those lines, like I had alluded to this earlier, but right now, Pitt is 158th in the net. The Panthers lost last night to Texas A&M at home. So if you're Ohio State, you should root for Pitt to win games. But it's going to be a bit of an uphill climb. If Pitt is able to move up high enough in the net rankings, that could change that loss to a quad 2 loss. And that actually does help Ohio State's case. Even if it's a quad 3 game when you play it, if it ends up a quad 2 game, it doesn't, that helps you. And in order for that to become a quad 2 game, since it was a true road game, Pitt would have to climb up to 135 in the net. So again, last year's team simply did not have this kind of loss on its resume. And that brings us back to something that I had talked about when the non-conference schedule was announced, which was that the schedule was set up in a way that a lot of these games were certainly winnable and certainly put Ohio State in a position to stack wins early that wouldn't necessarily like blow anybody away, but you built a schedule with winnable games that if you lost them, they could hurt you. And again, that's where we find ourselves right now. Because like I said, like a quad 3 win doesn't really do a whole lot for you, as we saw last year. They look at the quality of wins or your record in those top 2 quadrants. Winning in quad 3 doesn't really do much for you, but losing in quad 3 can hurt you. So at this point, Ohio State's schedule, according to KenPom, ranked 7th worst in the nation. That just does not leave a lot of margin for error. And that's why a game like what Ohio State played on Friday at Pitt is all the more difficult going forward, because it was a winnable game against a team that on paper Ohio State should beat. It did not, and now that is going to ding the resume unless Ohio State can play its way out of that. And I think so that's kind of looking at that loss, like how damaging was it from a numbers standpoint. I think from having heard from quite a few fans since that game, from the gut, this felt all too much like the first page in a book we've all read before. I think that's where a lot of fans are sitting right now, and certainly the ones that I'm hearing from, which is that this team is supposed to be better. And this team isn't supposed to be the kind of team that would go lose to a bad Pitt team. And there are certainly mitigating circumstances here. I mean, losing John Mobley to an ankle injury in the first half doesn't help. Apparently, Christoph Tilley was maybe a little bit more limited than we thought. That doesn't help. But this is the kind of game that when you lose this early to a team like this, it hangs over you. And I do think that like the fan base is feeling this loss right now, again, based on the conversations I've had with people, because it just feels like this was a winnable game and they didn't win it. And until they can right things and put together some wins against some high quality teams, or even just like win convincingly against a high major team, like I think that would go a long way. I'm coming back to the fact too that like after Ohio State beat Notre Dame at home by 1, Micah Shrewsbury made a point on the way out of his press conference to point out to me that his team was definitely better than number 70 in the country. And he might have an argument there. Let's see, where is Notre Dame in the net right now? Notre Dame is 88. 0-3 in quad one, and then 6-0 against the bottom three quadrants. So Notre Dame is 88 in the net. So whatever. But Pitt is definitely not better than number 70 in the country. And again, not to keep harping on it, but those are all things that just like make this loss more difficult, I think, for Ohio State to manage and for Ohio State fans to try to understand like how a loss like this happens. So it leads into the next thing I want to talk about here, which is just what needs to happen to make sure that this is a blip and nothing more. Because you can be forgiven a bad loss over the balance of a season. You can be forgiven a handful of bad losses over the balance of a season. And maybe Pitt finds a way to put it all together and becomes like the fifth best team in the ACC, which, given what the ACC is this year, that ain't exactly saying a lot. But I'm going to watch Northwestern play Wisconsin tonight. I think that's a 9 o'clock game here on Wednesday night. But Northwestern and Ohio State, to me, seem like teams that are on somewhat equal footing in the Big Ten. The Wildcats will come into this game. They're 5-2 at this point. They lost to Virginia by 5 on a neutral court, and then they lost to Oklahoma State by 5, also on a semi-home court. Let's see, where was that game? They played that game at the United Center. Okay, so in Chicago, not at home, but 5-point loss there. Otherwise, Northwestern has beaten Mercyhurst, Boston, and Cleveland State at home, won by 2 at DePaul, and then beat South Carolina 79-77 while playing in the Greenbrier MTE. So Northwestern's 49th in adjusted offensive efficiency, 81st in adjusted defensive efficiency. Again, before going to play at Wisconsin here on Wednesday night. So this gives Ohio State a chance. Like with all respect being paid to all parties here, if you're Ohio State and you just lost to Pitt, you don't want to have to turn around and immediately right now go play at Michigan or go play at Purdue or go play at Michigan State. Teams that are really kind of solidifying themselves at this early part of the season in the upper echelon of not just the league, but the country. This feels to me like a 50-50 type of game. And if the Pitt game was maybe a 60-40 game because you assumed Ohio State was better, but it was playing on the road, it makes a game like this feel all the more critical, even if it is the first game of 20 Big Ten games and it is the first game in December. You know that Northwestern under Chris Collins is going to play extremely hard. We saw that last year when the Wildcats had little to play for, were down bad at that point and injury depleted, and they came into Columbus and wiped the floor with the Buckeyes. You know what you're going to get from a Chris Collins team, and it's going that even though this, like I said, feels like a 50-50 game, that doesn't mean Ohio State can just walk in there and approach it the way that they approached the opening portion of that Pitt game and think that they're going to come out of there with a win. I've seen that game go sideways for them at Northwestern. It certainly could happen again if they don't play to the level they're supposed to play from the opening tip. So in that Pitt game, Jake Diebler had his first radio show on Monday, and he talked about quite a few things. And one of the things I wrote about for Wednesday morning here was about 2 key factors that he said, in hindsight, really doomed Ohio State. And it was defensive rebounding and fouling too much. So you look at as I've alluded to this a couple of times, I know I talked about it on the postgame podcast, but Pitt scored on its final 9 possessions of the game. They got a drive to the basket, a wide open dunk, and then Christoph Tilley was called for a foul. I wrote that, so it's 22. Barry Dunning Jr., what I wrote my play-by-play, drives into Tilley and 1. So that ends with free throws. And then Tilley, in the next possession, fouls Cameron Corrin, who drew 10 fouls in that game. So fouls Corrin, he goes to the line. The next possession is the one that gets extended with 2 offensive rebounds by Pitt and is then finished by a drive from Dunning to pull within 1. Next possession, Amari Bynum fouls Cameron Corrin. Ohio State's up 2. Bruce Thornton gets blocked at the rim, and then, the way I wrote it was Amari Witherspoon spins into Devin Royal, but draws a foul, 2 free throws. Thornton puts Ohio State ahead, Gabe Cupps fouls Cameron Corrin. He hits 2 free throws, and then that sets up the final possession of the game. Obviously, the buzzer-beating three-pointer from our guy, DeMarco Minor. So on those final 9 possessions, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them finished with free throws, and one of them had 2 offensive rebounds that kept the possession alive. Even on a possession, bad shots. Like I wrote down that in between the first and the second offensive rebound, one of the three-pointers, they just bricked it. So that's in clutch time, in the crucial moments of the game. Pitt scores on 9 straight possessions. 5 of them finish with free throws. One of them is extended twice by offensive rebounds from the same player. Clearly, that just has to be better. And those were 2 key things that Jake Diebler emphasized on his radio show. And along those lines, I think it can't be overstated either that this team needs to get healthy. Lots of execution things and effort things and kind of question marks about just like what the heck really happened in that game. But we're getting a little bit more of a picture here that maybe they were a little bit more banged up than we thought. The first thing, the obvious one, John Mobley Jr. left the game with an ankle injury and did not return. Watched the second half in a walking boot. And Diebler didn't have a lot to say on his radio show on Monday other than like praise God, it wasn't like super serious. We'll be getting an update on Thursday. We have interviews Thursday afternoon, so we'll get more info on Mobley at that point. But certainly, like, seeing him in a walking boot is not something Ohio State fans want to see. And I mentioned on the post-game pod that Diebler had referenced Tilly not being 100%, and he did kind of lean into that on the radio show and said, like, this is a big week for them to try to get healthy in a couple of cases. And it makes me wonder, again, sort of in hindsight, but like looking at that Pitt box score and looking at like Christoph Tilly missing 7 of his 8 field goal attempts, turning it over 3 times and having no assists. How much of that was injury affected? I don't know. And how much of that is like getting acclimated to this type of level of competition? I think that's affecting another player that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But both of these games, the 2 high major games so far, Pitt and Notre Dame, Ken Palm has classified them as B tier games. There's A tier, B tier, and then no tier. So when we go back and we look at Christoph Tilly throughout his career, so there's 2 B games this season. He's played the majority of the A and B games in his career have all been against St. Mary's and Gonzaga. So at least having been in the West Coast Conference, he has seen that level of competition sporadically throughout his last 3 years. But that's not true for the next player that we're going to talk about. And this is kind of my last point. And this is not laying anything solely at one player's feet. But Ohio State has to get something out of Brandon Knoll. Like, Ohio State has to get him going somehow. And Diebler did talk about him on his radio show. There's a pretty lengthy quote. We'll read that here in a second. And the loss, it's clearly not just on him. But in Ohio State's 2 high major games, he has been a complete non-factor. And I say that from just a statistical perspective. Against Notre Dame, he played 19 minutes. He did not take a shot. He had 1 rebound, 2 assists, a block, a steal. But he, again, did not. And this coming off a game where he had 17 and 11 against Appalachian State, and then he doesn't take a shot against Notre Dame. Fast forward here now to the Pitt game. He took 2 shots. They were both threes. He missed them both. Only played 9 minutes. Did not get a rebound. And this is a player who has the size and the proven ability to rebound, regardless of level. And that was one of the things in moving up from Wright State to Ohio State. It was, well, how will the scoring translate, and what do they need him to do offensively? And like, he needs to be a threat out there, certainly, but he has to be on the glass. And that was one of the things that Diebler talked about on his radio show. He said, there were 2 quotes really. Multiple files up. So they asked about like the offensive side, and he talked about like needing clarity. He said, I've got to help define where those spots are for him, like to be more aggressive offensively. He said, I like to give guys a lot of freedom. Some guys need a little more structure or guardrails to help them be aggressive. I think that's where we are with Brandon right now. We've got to find ways to get him comfortable. He's a guy who scored a ton of points in college. We've got to find out how do we enable him a little more where he's not hesitating or overthinking, but playing more instinctful. He said they've had several positive conversations with him since the Pitt game. Now, one of the things that I wrote about during the preseason was about, like, you went back to Brandon Knowles' freshman year, which honestly really was his third year in college, but his first year playing for Wright State. And he had a road trip where at Green Bay and at Milwaukee in mid-January, he had 32 the first night and 23 the second night. And he had 12 rebounds the first game, 9 rebounds the second game. Both of those were wins for Wright State at Green Bay, at Milwaukee. They then had a 4-game homestand. They lost against Purdue, Fort Wayne, Cleveland State, and then hosted Milwaukee and Green Bay again. So these are 2 weeks later. And in the Milwaukee game, he did not score, 0 of 3 from the floor. In the Green Bay game, he had 2 points, both on free throws. But in both of those games, even though his offense wasn't there, and when I talked to Scott Nagy, his former coach, about it, he said, you know, it was just kind of like him needing to understand like how good he can be, and that, like, you know, almost like just realizing that's what he can do. The offense wasn't there, but he had 11 rebounds against Milwaukee, and he had 9 against Green Bay. So this is a player who has only played, coming into Ohio State, he played a B game against on the road against Akron and on the road against Youngstown State his first year. He had an A game at Colorado State, a B game at Indiana, a B game at Davidson, a B game at Youngstown State, a B game at Oakland, an A game at Kentucky, a B game against Bradley, neutral court game, a B game at Robert Morris, and then B games at Milwaukee, and then at Robert Morris. So in his previous 3 seasons, he's played 12 games against B or A level competition, according to Ken Pom. So he doesn't have nearly the experience at this level that Christoph Tilley has. And Tilley doesn't have nearly the experience at this level that, like, the rest of the roster has in a lot of ways. But Brandon Knoll is also 6'8", 240. You know, this isn't Tanner Holden where he physically had some question marks and struggled in that regard. Like, whether the offense, you know, whether, I don't know that he's going to become a focal point of the offense, and it seems honestly unlikely given that Diebler has talked about having 4 guys who can lead the team in scoring on every night. Thornton, Royal, Mobley, Tilley. Those will be the 4 leading scorers this season. But they need Brandon Knoll to give them something. And it's a little bit telling that Amari Bynum played as much as he did in the loss at Pitt, and is clearly taking some of Brandon's minutes. How they're able to work on that this week and potentially get him going is going to be critical. And this is what Diebler said about the rest of Brandon's game, aside from just needing to score. He said, Brandon's got great awareness. He knows he didn't play with the aggressiveness on the glass. Maybe there's some lack of clarity for him offensively that it's going to take some time to iron out, but the glass is the glass. There's no clarity needed on that part. Be physical. Attack it. He should be going to the offensive glass every single time. Defensively, he should be hitting somebody and pursuing the ball every single time. So I think that about wraps up the Pitt loss and kind of sets the state of just like where things are. We'll get injury updates on Thursday, and then I'll have certainly more preview coverage leading into the game on Saturday. With it being a 2:00 game and 1:00 local time, I'm not staying overnight. I'm flying in on Friday and flying home on Saturday so I can get home for my youngest son's hockey game on Sunday morning. So I'm tentatively planning to like podcast from O'Hare. I've done this before. We'll see. That there's a chance you might not get the post game podcast until Monday morning. So kind of ironing out those details. But I did also want to pass along one little thing here. I saw 24/7 Sports National Basketball Director Eric Bossi covered the 2025 Thanksgiving Hoops Fest in Texas. He singled out some highlight players, and this is what he had to say about Alex Smith, Ohio State signee, playing at Prolific Prep. Quote, an argument can be made that Smith was the most consistent performer for his team, despite not being the highest ranked player. A slender face-up four-man who's very mobile, he is likely the best shooter on the prolific roster, and he showcased that by knocking down one open three after another. He's going to need to get a lot stronger before he's a factor in the Big Ten, but he's a total team player, and his understanding of how to be productive while not being the first, second, or even third option on offense will help him greatly when making the move to college. Thought that was worth passing along, thought that was interesting. So now I'm going to wrap this one up. I got some errands to go run and some more stuff to write. So again, I'll be with you likely. I'm not sure. It'll be this weekend, but you might not get it until Monday. Stay tuned and stay subscribed, and then it'll just pop into your phone whenever, and you'll be happy, hopefully. But as always, you can send along your questions, your comments, your love notes, your hate mail, and otherwise constructive criticism to me at Adam Jardy on Twitter or ajardy@dispatch.com. Thanks again for listening. Thanks, Patrick Flaherty, for making this work. I'll be back with you soon. Until then, be kind, take care, stay warm, and we'll talk soon.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.